Well, the case against the U.S. government's National Defense Authorization Act was made in court last week. And today, one of the plaintiffs in the case, Chris Hedges, stopped by our studios to talk about it. The case is called Hedges v. Obama. And as a journalist and former Middle East bureau chief for the New York Times, he says he's directly impacted by the law because it targets both terrorists and those who have associated with terrorists. In other words, it gives the government the power to detain and hold suspects without charge or trial, suspending due process and habeas corpus for citizens. Now, U.S. citizens are not exempt from this. In his words, Chris Hedges says he's fighting the law because the NDAA implodes our most cherished constitutional protections, and he says it permits the military to function on U.S. soil as a civilian law enforcement agency. Chris is a columnist for Truthdig, a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, and also the author of the book, The Death of the Liberal Class. He gave us a rundown on his day in court.
I think it went pretty well. The object of the trial is for the government to challenge the standing of myself and the other plaintiffs. There were three of us who testified in court, and then a statement was read by the Icelandic parliamentarian who did not want to travel on the advice of the foreign minister. She had been involved in the release of the collateral damage video on WikiLeaks, and all of her personal records had already been subpoenaed, although she's not a U.S. citizen, by the U.S. government. The State Department would not give her guarantee in writing that she would not be held. So her deposition was read by the writer Naomi Wolf, a woman from Lex O'Brien from Days of Rage testified, a member of Occupy London, and then I think I swallowed up about 3 hours.
So, I mean, I know you wrote about this, and you were talking about, making sure that some of these attorneys had to make sure that you were a fit plaintiff. I mean, what does that mean? I mean, you're a Pulitzer Prize-winning award-winning journalist. What's not fit?
Well, the question is whether you could be affected by this piece of legislation. And when we went through the State Department list of terrorism groups, over the course of my career as a foreign correspondent, I have spent time with individuals or with groups that are of 17 of those organizations, and close contact, including Al-Qaeda. So I think it was. I think it would be pretty hard for them to deny me standing. Well, the most interesting exchange occurred at the end of the day when the judge was questioning the government lawyers and kept trying to press them for an assurance that I or any of the other plaintiffs would not be, that government could guarantee that we would not be picked up by the NDAA, which of course permits the government to strip us of due process, hold us, not only allow the military to hold us, but hold us in a military facility, including an offshore military facility. And the government just repeatedly would not do that. It was a really sort of frightening moment when it was clear that the nebulous language of the bill, even in the view of the government, offered no protection. Yeah,
certainly that was one of the things that could have been, at least something they could have done, is to add language, one sentence perhaps, that said, this will not affect journalists who are doing their job.
Well, or American citizens. I mean, Dianne Feinstein had proposed that they insert into the legislation wording that exempted American citizens. And that was something that the sponsors of the bill, Carl Levin and John McCain, as well as the Obama White House, decided not to do.
Really, really interesting that that happened. We saw last week, even though this bill has passed, it was signed into law on New Year's Eve when a whole lot of us were, out celebrating the new year. We're starting to see both Republicans and Democrats in Congress, even as recent as last week, sort of retake interest in this matter, retake interest in the NDAA, and perhaps talking about doing some things in the future to change it. But Mark Udall already tried to make an amendment to take out some of the controversial aspects of it. That wasn't put into place. Why is it that these lawmakers are taking this up again?
I'm not sure why. I mean, I think that and we're really not, this is a long document, the NDAA. We're only talking about two sections, Section 1021 and Section 1022. which in essence allows the executive branch to strip an American citizen of their constitutional rights to due process and to hold them in military facilities. That's what we're questioning. A very, very tiny part of the bill, which I think, you don't have to be a legal scholar to determine is clearly unconstitutional. I mean, the egregious violation of constitutional rights is really, undeniable.
So that's your argument, and it's a very solid and kind of simple one. What is the argument of the government, who says that this is, in fact, a viable law? Well,
the argument of the government is that we are not covered persons. And that's also part of the language of the bill. Covered persons are people who substantially supported al-Qaeda, the Taliban, or what they call associated forces, which again is undefined. What are associated forces? What does substantially mean? What does supported mean? These are very, very vague terms that encompass a variety of groups, many of which did not even exist during the attacks of 9/11. And I think it was telling to all of us in the courtroom that when Judge Forrest pressed the government on this issue, the government would offer absolutely no guarantees that our constitutional rights would be protected because, given the language of this bill, or now law, they can't.
It is really interesting, and it seems to me not accidental that a lot of this language is so vague that was put into the bill. I know afterwards you guys had a press conference outside. What is sort of the message that you're trying to get across now, in between now and the time a ruling is issued?
Well, I was being grilled, so I wasn't part of the press conference. That took place while I was...
Oh, it was while you were inside the courtroom.
I was actually going back and forth with Assistant U.S. Attorney. Well, the message is that this is not the kind of power we want vested in the hands of the state, because eventually they'll use it. Alexa O'Brien, one of the plaintiffs from the
U.S. Day of Rage,
spelled out or offered emails that had been released through WikiLeaks of Stratfor, which attempted to tie her organization with jihadist groups and al-Qaeda. I mean, that's what they do. When you build this...
So this isn't something that could happen. This is something that is already happening.
That's correct. And my fear is that if the Occupy movement or an incarnation of the Occupy movement rises again, if there are more mass protests, which I expect there will be, since the government has done nothing to ameliorate the problems that push people out into the streets, then it becomes very easy to link these peaceful, nonviolent, dissident movements with terrorism, and at that point we're all finished. And I think that it is, for those of us who are fighting this bill, it's an understanding that it's not about them, i.e. those on the outside. It's really about us.
And finally, you said a ruling was expected sometime in May or June. Just based on your experience in the courtroom, what are you expecting to come out of this?
I think it will be very hard for the judge to deny standing, which means that she has to issue some kind of a ruling. Our lawyers, Bruce Safran and Carl Mayer, have asked for a temporary injunction, which would, in essence, put the law into abeyance and would force the government to appeal to an appellate court. But she has other ways to wiggle out of it. I think I'd be very, very surprised if she didn't recognize standing, whether she'll issue an injunction or not. It's hard to tell. I mean, it depends on the briefs, and I'm trying to read a judge who I only saw for one day.
Absolutely. Certainly sounds like an interesting experience. We hope you keep us posted. As always, Chris Hedges, columnist for TruthDig, also author of the book, The Death of the Liberal Class.